Hi, my name is Trevor Klee, and this is the LSAT Logical Reasoning process, specifically for explain or resolve questions. So I think this is important because a lot of my students tend to get tripped up on these sorts of questions. They don't really understand how they fit in with normal logical reasoning questions. So I'm going to explain how I tackle them. A bit about my credentials: scored 175 on my own LSAT, and I've helped multiple tutoring clients score 170 plus on their LSAT, and this is what I teach them. So the most important thing about this process is that you have to understand the question as an argument. So understand it as an argument. Now, what does that mean? It means a couple things. First of all, it means we need to find the conclusion. So these are the general steps I actually do for pretty much any logical reasoning question. I find the conclusion, which is like an opinion or a prediction or a plan. It's something that we can put therefore in front of. And importantly, it has to be supported by the rest of the argument. So if you do, the questions that are like, what are the conclusion of this question? Well, we might practice some of those later, but you can put therefore in front of it, and the rest of the question supports it. So what's our second step? Our second step is understand the reasoning and how it supports the conclusion. So if the conclusion is what the rest of the question supports, the supports are the reasoning. So this is stuff we can put because or since in front of. Now last, we need to identify any gaps between the reasoning and the conclusion. In what ways do the premises or the reasoning not lead to the conclusion? We're never going to disagree directly with the reasoning. We can never say, oh, well, this is wrong. And we can never just say the conclusions look stupid. We actually have to say, okay, given that the reasoning is correct, why is that necessarily, not mean the conclusion is correct? Now, this is especially important for explain or resolve type questions because the conclusion is implied while the reasoning is weak or non-existent. So the conclusion is going to be somewhat closer to a fact here, but we can still put therefore in front of it. And when we put because or since in front of our reasoning, it's not going to make a lot of sense. So we're going to really need to fill in these gaps in our explain or resolve questions because there's going to be huge gaps. Now, let me show you what I mean. Let's go straight to the practice questions. So let's start with practice question 1. Now notice I'm going to spend a lot more time on these stimulus than I am on the answer choices. I think that's really important. You understand the stimulus as an argument first. You don't get distracted with the answer choices until the very end. So, practice question. Question 1. Coffee plantation sales of coffee beans grew from 500,000 to 1 million from 1950 to 1960. This increase was because the coffee plantation began selling its product on the international market, which paid more for the coffee beans than the domestic market. Even though the sales of coffee beans increased, the owners of the coffee plantation did not take home more money. So, where's our conclusion here? Here's our conclusion. Therefore, the owners of the coffee plantation did not take home more money. Okay, where's our reasoning? Because the sales of coffee beans grew from 500,000 to 1 million from 1950 to 1960. And then the rest of this is just sort of explaining why it increased. So we've got a huge gap here between the reasoning and conclusion, right? Because the sale of coffee beans grew from 500,000 to 1 million from 1950 to 1960, therefore the owners of the coffee plantation did not take home more money. That's a huge gap. You'd expect if their sales doubled from 1950 to 1960, the owners of the coffee plantation would take home more money. So we need to fill in that gap somehow. So for our answer choices, we're going to look for something that explains why, even though their sales doubled, they did not take home more money. All right, let's take a look. Answer choice A. By 1970, the price of coffee beans rose domestically while the price of coffee beans fell internationally. This doesn't matter. It's talking about 1970, and my reasoning that I was trying to figure out, or really my conclusion too, both have to do with 1950 to 1960. So that doesn't help. B, between 1950 and 1960, the price of coffee beans in the domestic market fell drastically. Okay, but even if the price of coffee beans fell drastically, that doesn't change the fact that their sales doubled. It might have made it more impressive that that they managed to double their sales, given that the price of coffee beans fell drastically. But still, if their sales doubled, I'd expect them to take home more money. So B doesn't help. C, the international and domestic price for coffee bean byproducts, like caffeine extract, fell drastically from 1950 to 1960. This would help resolve the paradox. Why? Well, because my conclusion here is therefore they did not take home more money, because the international and domestic price for coffee bean byproducts fell drastically from 1950 to 1960. So even though they made more from selling the coffee beans, they apparently made a lot less from selling the coffee bean byproducts. So that would explain why they did not take home more money. So in a test situation, once I found this, I'd be happy. I'd just select it. But in this practice situation, let's go through the rest of them and explain why the rest of them don't make sense. Increased competition from international coffee manufacturers result in a much tougher market for all coffee manufacturers. That may be true, still doesn't explain why your sales would double and you wouldn't take home more money. So D doesn't work. And E, by 1960, many coffee plantation owners only sold coffee beans internationally. That doesn't matter. All right. So you see here how we're filling in the gaps between the reasoning and the conclusion. We had a huge gap at first, and C helps fill it in. Let's go on to another practice question. Here, the New York art competition claims to prize originality. However, this year's grand prize went to a painting, Apollo, that was clearly influenced by previous year's grand prize, Dionysus. So, each of the following, if true, would most help to resolve the apparent discrepancy in the information presented. Okay, so we know there's a discrepancy here. They give us a nice clue there. What is the discrepancy? Well, we need to actually, the conclusion's more implied. So it's more implied. And the implied conclusion is, therefore, the New York art competition, something went wrong, right? If they claim to prize originality, therefore they prize originality because this year's grand prize went to a painting that was clearly influenced by a previous year's grand prize, right? Huge gap there. Therefore, the New York art competition prizes originality because this year's grand prize went to a painting that was clearly influenced by a previous year's grand prize. I'm writing because there. So there's a big gap there. If they did prize originality, you would expect them not to do that. So we need to resolve this apparent discrepancy in the information. How can they claim to prize originality and give the grand prize to a painting that was clearly influenced by a previous year's grand prize? And we're trying to resolve this, and apparently all of these resolve this except for one. All right, let's look at A. Art critics often enjoy paintings that can appear innovative while showing their influences. This would help resolve it, right? Because if, yes, they prize originality, Apollo might still be original, even if it was influenced by a previous year's grand prize. And that's apparently something that art critics like. Art critics like that it was innovative, but it still showed its influences. So this one would help to resolve, and because it would help to resolve, I'm crossing it out. B, Dionysus won a grand prize so long ago that the art world at large has forgotten about it. this would help resolve it, right? They do prize originality, and they awarded it to Apollo even though it wasn't original. Why? Because they didn't realize it wasn't original. Pretty simple. This is a classic, like, sort of point of view thing. Yes, they do prize originality, but they didn't know this wasn't original. So, because this would help resolve it, I'm crossing it out. C, it's easier to create a painting if it's within an established tradition. This would not help resolve it. Why? Well, we don't care whether it's easier to create a painting if it's within an established tradition. We're looking more from the perspective of the judges. Why would the judges choose a painting that is clearly influenced by a previous year's grand prize? So this would be why you might paint something that's influenced by a previous year's grand prize. But why would the judges choose something? So this one does not help to resolve the apparent discrepancy, which is why we select it. All right. Again, if this was the test, I would just select this and move on to the next one so I wouldn't waste time. Because this is a practice situation, I'm not going to do that. All right. D. While Apollo was influenced by Dionysus, it was sufficiently different in its details to still be original. So this would help explain it, right? This is pretty similar to A. Yes, it was influenced, but it was still original. So why would they select it even though they claimed to prize originality? Well, it is original. It's just influenced. So because this would help to resolve it, I crossed it out. Then E, Apollo displayed technical skills far beyond any painting in the competition. So here, E would also help explain it. The New York Art Competition prizes originality, but they don't only prize originality. There's other stuff that's going on there too. Here in E, we get the explanation that Apollo displayed technical skill, so it had something else that went above and beyond. So even though it wasn't the most original, it made up for it in other ways. So this would explain the discrepancy. All right, so that's pretty much it. So if you want more questions like this, please check out my book on the logical reasoning process on gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. And if you're looking for LSAT tutoring or just want more information about the LSAT, check out my website, trevorkleetutor.com. And then last, if you're like this video, if you thought it was helpful, please like and subscribe. So, yeah, keep tuning in. I'll be doing more of these logical reasoning stuff. Again, if you want a bunch more explain and resolve, as well as every other type of book or every other type of question, check out my logical reasoning book. It's on my Gumroad page, gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. Also check out my tutoring website, trevorkleetutor.com. Thanks.